Perfect. We are live, ladies and gentlemen. As all the attendees pour in, we'll give us a quick moment, quick audio check. And then we get to talk about everybody's two most loved topics. And more importantly, how to look at it from a positive light. People and space. Got some great speakers, quick audio checks as we get started. We'll give everybody an extra couple of seconds to log in. Couple hundred registered, and looking forward to some great conversation. As you are quickly logging in, the chat is open. Please let us know what part of the continent you're coming in from today. Would be appreciative. And we'll customize some of the content. Q&A is also open. And if it's on topic, I'll throw those in. If not, we won't. I'll delete. Or we'll cover it together. Excellent. Dr. S, New Jersey. Fantastic. Adrienne's on the West Coast. Jason and I are on the East Coast. And I think we've got a good cross section. I think I saw some earlier from Anchorage to Honolulu to Key West and everything in between. Richmond, Virginia. Fantastic. We just did a CE course there, Dr. S. Good to see you. And my grandfather used to be with NATO and was stationed at Virginia Beach, North Carolina. Perfect. Reston, Virginia. Fantastic. So there you go, Adrienne. Lots to keep you on your toes here.
That's a great thing.
Yeah. Perfect. We'll give another 10 seconds and then we'll jump in. Multiple screens. Good to see some friendly names in the group. Feel free, guys. We're going to keep this as interactive as possible. God knows we've had some amazing content over the years, but we're live. So this gives us a great opportunity. We have really brought in one of the foremost experts in people. And people, not only people, but people that choose to work in dental clinics.
People who need people.
That's right. Don't get me singing like before.
I know you're about to burst into song. I can tell.
Well, look. First of all, welcome everybody. For those of you that is your first Cirrus webinar, we do these from time to time as a great value add to our over 13,000 clients and 46,000 in our database. Adrienne, it is always a privilege to speak with Adrienne. Bent Erickson and Associates has been a true partner in every sense of the word for well over a decade, because with very similar objectives. We want to keep doctors being great doctors, and we want to help leverage all the expertise on the business side to help take frustrating situations and stressful situations and all of this stuff. We want to take these away. And yes, from the anonymous attendees, why are people so crazy these days? People think they're the doctors, they're just as rude in times, don't pay for treatment. Things have changed. It's a good point, and actually a perfect segue, because things have changed a lot.
Yes,
employees have changed a lot. People have changed a lot. Landlords have certainly changed a lot. Maybe even before we go in, Adrienne, what have you seen in terms of change, especially post-pandemic? We saw so many hygienists leave and not come back. There's an entitlement perspective of it. Nobody wants to do the above and beyond work anymore. It's endless. But Adrienne, what can you share from what you've seen?
that is a real struggle that dental offices across the country, and I'm sure across the provinces there in Canada, are facing, that it's a new mindset with some of the team members out there. We were just at a meeting in Washington State several weeks ago. The president of the ADA was there in the audience, and the ADA has some staggering statistics about the number of hygienists that are graduating in the next 7 to 10 years and the number of dentists that it looks like will be graduating. And there's probably 25% of the number of hygienists that are needed, and they don't see that getting any better anytime soon. So there really is this struggle of folks finding people that want to work and that are willing, as you said, Eric, to go above and beyond with the work ethic that some of us baby boomers was raised with. We believe that there are still people out there, good people that want to work, and finding them is a critical element of success to the practice. So we'll talk about some things throughout the webinar here to hopefully help people and advise them and answer questions. But yeah, it's definitely a struggle sometimes.
And I mean, Adrienne, as a background on Adrienne, for those of you that don't know, Adrienne is probably the go-to for interpersonal and HR compliance, etc., in dentistry for people.
Well, thank
Not
you.
only was Adrienne with the HR experience, she was managing a large dental group practice for 17 years, right? So if you can imagine all the people, the hygienists, the interpersonal relationships, the hiring, the firing, the organizational charts, et cetera, are key, to say the least. So she really has now morphed and is the key opinion leaders, heart and soul of Bent Erickson's, all the education programs, training, human resource services. And when the proverbial stuff hits the wall, Adrienne's guidance to doctors from coast to coast to coast to coast is critical to help navigate through all these. So Adrienne, again, thank you so much for
Wow.
being with us and
Thank you for
sharing
that.
your wisdom.
Thank you for that very kind introduction.
A privilege. And speaking of great people, which is, again, shifting my perception on great individuals, Jason Nghiem, one of our senior consultants. Jason is a true art of the business of dental office lease negotiations. This is someone who has spoken to thousands of doctors and in a very calm, collective way, very clearly able to look at objectively our clients as they are looking to transition, expand, relocate, etc., and be very methodical to identify the concerns, go through the real estate components, and help to objectively make sure that the second biggest expense beyond people, the real estate, is aligned with a proper long-term lease. So Jason, thank you so much for joining us, and we appreciate you on another great webinar.
Thank you for having me.
So let's jump right in on the next one, Jason. We've got as a bit of an overview and a bit of a key objectives here. Again, we want to keep things interactive and fun. We want to keep things there. So feel free to throw in some funny questions as we go through. Nothing will be maybe some if it's not HR compliant. We've selected our hosts differently tonight. So we should be fine on that. When the hosts are HR compliant, it's even better. So on the next slide, Jason, we've got a great one here. So what we want to do here is to talk about people. We want to talk about how do we ensure that the two biggest contracts that we're not dealing with, oh my God, I've fallen ill, I split my finger, I need to sell, I need to change, and whoops, my employment contracts aren't up to snuff or in place, my lease agreement is not up to snuff or available for sale, is a key piece. In addition to that, documentation, right? Handbooks are a key component. what do we now need to do post-pandemic to clearly lay out what happens if, right? And goodness knows that handbooks certainly didn't cover global pandemics.
True.
The big one that I'm sure there's lots of questions, I just saw one pop up, is hiring and retaining quality employees. I remember starting a business in Southern California, and I learned the concept of ghosting in 2009. And never in my life with someone that said, yes, I am confirmed for an interview, and not show. Which I think this is half of our in-person interviews don't even show up or call us to state they're not coming, right? Which is just such a huge disrespect of time. So lots of interesting Q&A that'll come through. So we'll talk about the personal questions, right? Good things, bad marriages, emotional problems, etc. Why has this now become our challenge as business owners? The flip side as well is, look, there's $100,000 traps in your employment agreements as well as your lease agreements. And then ultimately, from an empowerment perspective, how do we be proactive with these troubled employees? How do we be differently recruiting, retaining, etc.? What does make the mind of a millennial tick? Adrienne, if you can solve that, or Jason, I would be forever in
I'd
your
be
good
on a
graces.
beach in Tahiti with a little drink with an umbrella in my hand.
That's right. On the next, a little bit about us. We're unique, as we touch on here, is our focus has always been similar to Ben Erickson, keeping doctors being great doctors. We fundamentally believe that the existing market is ripe for disruption, and we've proven that over 30 years with over 13,000 of these, where historically it's someone being paid for by the landlord, and the more the doctor pays, right, the more they're receiving in commissions, and then you're locked into a binding letter of intent, and then before you know it, right, someone's reviewing and dotting the I's and crossing the T's, and you've just committed yourselves to one of your largest contracts, bar none. So some of our largest clients across North America really describe us as that sweet spot. We've got all the great commercial real estate data, we've got all the experience, and we are that advisor. We're the only healthcare specialized tenant advisory and lease negotiation firm of a kind in North America. And it's been a privilege helping, again, well over 13,000 doctors because of how important they are. And you are the best tenants on the planet. You've got the highest build-out costs, the lowest default rates. You're in the same location for 26 and a half years. You're COVID proof. You can't work from home, regardless of what your staff says, Adrienne. And you're in the same location for 26 and a half years. So you're the best tenant on the planet, yet at the same time, the least likely to get a properly structured and negotiated lease. And then skipping ahead to the real estate side, Jason, from there and the next one, the data becomes key. So as Adrienne, you see all sorts of things on the HR side. I'll pass it to Jason because as we spend time with each and every one of our clients, and there'll be a section for, if you're curious about your rental rates, your demographics, we'll have a section for it at the end. But the data becomes critical. And my God, has the data been changing. The retail versus commercial space versus some really wild articles showing how vacant and empty big commercial spaces are and how much some big landlords are hurting as a result. So Jason, over to you. Let's take it away.
Absolutely. So I'd like to highlight here some of the data that we've been seeing. And certainly it depends on the market, but what we've been seeing is through COVID and otherwise, it's especially regarding the larger office towers, there's been a significant decrease in tenancy and a subsequent drop in rent. But it depends on the market, depends on the exact type of real estate we're talking about. And what does this mean to the doctor? Well, a couple of key things is, like Eric had mentioned, you're the best tenant on the planet, lowest default rates, can't work from home. And when a practice is built in a space, on average, it's going to stay there 26 and a half years. Now, the key piece in regards to this is landlords know this as well. And when rates are unstable, there's a potential trend downward in vacancies and rents, landlords, when it comes time to renewal, they may look to potentially squeeze their most stable tenant, which more often than not ends up being the dentist. So what do you do about it? Well, in terms of the way the office lease and how it works for you, there's a couple of key things to keep in mind. When we're going through a lease, when you're thinking about, should you sign a lease or not, if you're thinking about what the renewal for the next 5 or 10 years looks like for you, you need to be very mindful that the rents, the other financial terms, your base rents, your annual increases, your common area maintenance are fair and affordable to you and in line with market or potentially lower than market. Long-term stability and security in terms of that lease agreement. What we want to ensure is that the lease agreement aligns with your long-term plans for the practice. If you are intending to stay in the space for the next 5, 10, 15 years, what does the lease currently hold in the legal terms, let alone the options to renew and the initial term? What we'd also want to see is a minimizing of risk and exposure to the business and also to you, the individual, the practice owner. Things like personal guarantees, you need to be very mindful of that. Other items, bigger items in terms of the legal language, demolition clauses, relocation clauses, and otherwise. You absolutely need to have an understanding of how these impact your business and what the outlook is if you have those in your lease. Also, many of our doctors that speak to us, they sometimes have some questions for themselves as far as where they will be in terms of the practice. If they're not sure if they want to retire early or who they'll sell to or when they'll sell the practice. A huge piece of that puzzle is the lease and what it holds. So a big portion of the direction in which the doctor can go will be held in a lease. So it's very important to maximize all the flexibility possible within that document. And
More
finally,
specifically, there is things like a death and disability clause. You want having certain termination rights. It should not be all one-sided, because those little tiny clauses to look at for the what ifs are key. One thing just to throw up, speaking of you and some customization here, I pulled up a quick poll on this. Speaking of you and your situation, right? As we touch on some of these components, give us a little piece. We'll help to customize a little bit, right? Are you, planning to sell in the next 5 years? Are you planning to stay put? Are you planning to acquire? Are you planning to open and grow? Right? What does your situation look like? What sort of issues, right? What's the number one issues facing you as an employer? Little section. In addition to that, right? Are you looking to hire within the next 6 months? Right? And some quick pieces that make it easy for those of you that have questions for Adrienne, et cetera, that you don't want to do publicly, right? There's a little section here for us for rental rates, lease review, as well as a little section for other questions or consultations with the great people at Ben Derrickson. Okay, next up, Jason.
So now, when it comes to the financial impact of your lease, it's very important. It's the lease and its financial components is far greater than the individual numbers. So when your broker or your landlord indicates to you that, look, your rent is going to be increasing $1 year on year and starting off at a base rent of $25 a square foot, it's far greater than what it may appear. When you sign a lease for 10 years with multiple options to renew at 3% increases over the lifetime of the dentist at the practice, what it can equate to is $2.923 million of rent being paid to the landlord. So before you sign anything, it's very important to have a look at not only the base rent, but what does the landlord have in terms of abilities to affect your ability to practice now, but also your ability to potentially sell in the future.
That's a huge number.
It is an enormous number.
It's funny, we
In
did
fact,
one with a big study group, Adrian, and he said, look, just keep it simple. Dentists, in many cases, we're so focused on just the day-to-day. What
Yeah.
we don't want and what we need to have is just someone to give a different perspective, help to make sure we're looking ahead and looking at the big picture. And yeah, it's, between people, number one expense, second biggest expense is the lease. And just
Hmm.
the lease alone at $5,000 a month is almost $3,000 over the average tenure that the doctor's in the same space. So we've got literally a almost perfect 50-50 between those who lease and those to own. Uh, and then Adrian, from that perspective, roughly 36% are planning to open or relocate, right? And then also we have pretty an equal mix about potentially buying, potentially transitioning, and beyond. And then in addition to that, um, uh, lots of interesting answers for number one issues facing you as an employer, but hint people, it looks like the theme. And roughly, Adrian, roughly 45% are looking to hire within the next 6 months. So just to put that into perspective.
Great.
Uh,
Thank you.
Speaking of traps, Jason, and issues facing clinics today, what is the typical landlord trap?
well, the biggest one is in terms of the term. Well, they certainly are looking for two things. Landlords are looking for your term, as in how long you're going to stay in the space for, and they're going to look for your rent. So what they want to maximize is, of course, your rent and your tenure there. How do they do that? Well, the first part of this is in terms of when you need to renew your lease, right? What we find is many more often than not, doctors are not always mindful of when they need to renew their lease. The critical piece here is when you have an option to renew, you need to provide notice to the landlord at a certain date that is set in your lease. What we see frequently is 6 months notice before the expiry, i.e., if your lease expires, let's say December 31st of this year, you need to indicate to the landlord that you want to renew June 30th. Now, if you miss that deadline, what happens with those options is those two options to renew for 5 years each, they become null and void, at which point the landlord can provide you with a completely new lease with completely new rental rates. So what we advise here is to get the ball rolling a little bit earlier. In fact, 1 to 2 years prior to expiry is actually the ideal sweet spot here as far as the renewal of the lease. It provides you maximum leverage. When it comes to the negotiation, you potentially could leave if you need to find a new space. And frankly, some landlords they tend to drag their feet when it comes to the renegotiation of the lease anyway.
Let me add a little extra candor to this, and we'll keep this rolling to past Adrian here in a moment. But look, the landlords are a for-profit business that definitely, in many cases, are dealing with high interest rates, high payments, and locked-in revenue through long-term leases. They're going to find creative ways to survive. The biggest one is these days is they're not proactively reminding doctors of these critical dates. They never did, but in some cases, as soon as that date misses, those remaining options become null and void. So the simple takeaway here is always be proactive. Start the process at least 2 years prior to expiry, right? And have a very strategic plan to it so they can't just brush you off, brush you off, brush you off. It's a careful dance. We've figured it out over 30 years, but starting 2 years out maximizes your leverage. Do not wait until the date or waiting for the landlord's proposal, etc., because it'll typically always happen after you were required to give them required notice, right, via carrier pigeon, right, and certified mail, right, via USPS, right, by such and such a date. Jason, moving ahead. Very
Yes.
high level in the essence of time. There's 7 main financial variables. Know that you can save dramatically by leveraging each and every one of these. They're sort of like valves on the wall. The more you turn up, the more you turn down, right? Becomes important. Realize each and every one and make sure you've got someone in your corner that's squeezing each and every drop of the lemon and knowing what is fair and reasonable versus not. Most doctors are shocked to know that common area maintenance is negotiable. And yes, you can get a better deal than that group or whatever next door. Okay, Jay? As I mentioned before, right, you're the best tenant on the planet. Don't go into the lion's den without thinking ahead of that carefully choreographed game of chess. In the essence of time.
I'd also like to emphasize that, in terms of thinking from the landlord's perspective, the landlord doesn't want to lose a tenant either, right? So that's why we always emphasize, look, you want to start early as possible, right? You do, although the build out costs that we see for dentists are $250 to $350 square foot, right? It does make it more financially difficult for you to leave. The landlord simply doesn't want to lose a tenant, right? So you do have a ton of leverage here, especially if you start early. Now, moving along. So in terms of the other financial pieces of the lease, they are not always plainly written in the lease as a number. Many of these items have enormous financial impact on the value of the practice and your ability to run it, especially in terms of the sale of the practice. Many of you would be familiar with some of these items here. Demolitions and relocation clauses have an absolutely huge impact on your ability to sell, your ability or your buyer's ability to potentially get financing to purchase your clinic. In addition to that, other items here, personal guarantees, right? What are you liable for during the lease, and potentially what are you liable for after you sell, post assignment of the lease? There's a number of things that should be amended and can be amended as part of the negotiation of your lease.
Jason, what is quiet enjoyment?
Okay. So we'll go back to this one here. So quiet enjoyment is an interesting one. The long and the short of it is, if this is in your lease, you doing your dentistry in the space, you should not be disturbed, essentially. So if you have this here, if there's some disruption in the plaza or in the building, this provides you some protection against that.
Makes sense.
Okay? So
becomes more important too when you see landlords that go under or they want to substantially renovate the plaza, right, or redevelop, etc. Ultimately, the ability to make sure that you've got access to the space, can use
so
the space.
So it's not just the people next door partying really loudly, right? Okay, got it.
Could be.
Got it.
It could be partially that. We actually had an instance where a new landlord purchased one of our docks buildings. They're doing renovations in the space, and there's so much dust being kicked up around the unit that it's absolutely revolting, number one. But there's jackhammers that are going nonstop during the hours of operation. And it's simply not the right environment for a dental office to be operating in.
Yeah.
So that's why that language is there. So I pose this question to the audience. This particular section in a lease, this is a typical assignment section that may be held in any of your leases. I would ask the question, can anybody pick out or see any of the issues here? And I guess full disclosure, there are a number of them here. many of them, like in fact, the majority of them have an enormous impact to the potential transition from yourself to an associate or a buyer on market. I'll give you a few, maybe 10 more seconds to evaluate this. See if you can pick out anything here.
The bright side, who enjoys reading lease agreements? And/or employment contracts coming up next year.
Page turners.
Right.
So, no, you've had your chance, guys. So I'm going through this now. You'll see here, in terms of the assignment, one of the big ones here is right from the very beginning. So when it comes to an assignment, when you're leasing a space from someone else, and you're asking the landlord to insert or allow another business entity to operate from their space, you need to ask for their permission. So why is this particular highlighted section a problem? Well, what it states is, if you, the tenant, wish to assign, you, the tenant, shall first have received the consent of the landlord. Why is this a problem? Well, as far as this is concerned, the way it's written, the landlord may say no. The landlord may simply say yes, or they may say no. There's no particular, it's not really specific enough, frankly, as far as them consenting to provide the assignee of your practice to be in that space. The second piece is, it's a doozy. The landlord does have the ability with this particular section to say yes, to approve the tenant's request to assign the lease or sublet. Part number two is decline, which of course means the landlord can say yes, the landlord can say no, and the third one is the big one here, is that they can choose to terminate the lease agreement upon the effective date of such proposed lease assignment or sublet. So in plain English, what that means is, if I am buying a practice and you ask the landlord to assign the lease to me, to have me as the business owner in that space, in their space, they can choose to terminate the lease that you have and deal with me directly. Clearly, this is a problem. What we don't want is the landlord to simply terminate your lease for asking, simply for asking. It's not, it doesn't fit with the way dentistry works. You and I, we all know that if you're putting a dentist in the space, they're going to be just as good a tenant as you will be. Furthermore, landlords, they're looking out for their best interest when it comes to their space. And if they have another business entity in their space, this particular line provides them significant leverage as far as what they'll be earning in terms of rent. So it indicates here that landlord shall have the right to revise the minimum rent to be paid during the remainder of the term to the greater of the then current market rent for the lease premises, or 15% greater than the current rent. So the scenario works like this. If I'm about to buy your practice, the landlord does have the ability with this particular section to raise the rent that you've been paying for all these years to the current market rent, or 15%. Now, if I was a buyer of your practice and I'm expecting to pay $20 in rent, and I'm suddenly seeing a large increase prior to being assigned the lease, frankly, I may have some second thoughts about purchasing the practice. This has a huge impact on the sellability of the clinic. The next section is also, oh, please go ahead.
I was just going to add, I mean, we share these for a few reasons. One is in preparation for the eventual sale, 5-10 years prior to this, as Adrienne will attest on the employee side, employment agreements, handbooks, etc. The earlier to get these structured right and fixed is far easier while there's lots of runway than it is to realize these when the 17% of you are thinking of selling within the next year or so. So ultimately, the takeaway here is, one, this assignment section doesn't apply to really any other commercial tenant, because who else is selling their business for multi-millions of dollars? But it's huge for dentists. So ultimately, you can't sell without your landlord's consent and approval, right? Just for asking, they can terminate the lease. Or number three is, in this consideration clause, the landlord can actually be entitled to a percentage of your practice sale proceeds. And the last one, as crazy as it is, the doctor, you won't be released. So even after you sell, you will still remain as personally and continually liable as you are today. So, as Jason was reiterating, one little clause, hundreds of thousands of dollars of risk.
So, as we just reiterated there, in terms of the section, in terms of many other sections in the lease, any number of these lines has a huge financial impact on the practice. Eric and I, we recently spoke to a doctor that has been having a heck of a time selling their practice, and part of it is the assignment of the lease. For this particular doctor, in fact, we ended up working with them. We had a great Google review from them. They tried to sell the practice 3 times, and the landlord effectively stopped the sale every time. So at 74 years of age, Dr. Marinaz was forced to relocate her practice just to sell it, essentially. So what had happened was we had worked out a fantastic new deal at a new location for her, where the landlord, more than happy to take on a dental tenant, they were more than willing to cover 100% of the build-out costs as well. So, there is, while there is many red flags that may be held within the lease, there's certainly light at the end of the tunnel. Now, as far as other clauses and the effect on the practice, we recently did a case study with one of the practice brokerages locally with us. So we evaluate the practice. We had the practice valuation done. Billings at 1.050. The valuation was 1.096 with no termination rights, i.e. no demolition clauses, no ability for the landlord to redevelop the plaza and kick the dentist out. No ability for the landlord to potentially relocate that dentist from one unit to another. 1.906. We also determined that if the landlord did have that ability, the termination right, either demolition or relocation, enormous impact. It's a $525,000 swing from having no termination rights to having those termination rights. It's enormous. So, well, frankly, what do you do about it? Well, the first effort is, we ideally want to get ahead of the game and ensure that those potentially hazardous and expensive clauses are not within the lease. But if it is already there, or if their landlord insists to have it there, there's still a number of ways to potentially mitigate that risk and minimize its impact to the process. With a 5-year deferral on the demolition clause, we effectively split that difference in half.
So as we passed Adrienne, as we cross the halfway mark, the biggest takeaway here is that the start early, right? Know what's in your lease. And yes, even the practice brokers now are impacting and reducing upwards of, in this case, $525,000 in preparation, just because of some of the clauses and terminologies in the lease. So as we pass to Adrienne, get all the information, right? Get all the data, have your lease professionally reviewed, understand rental rates, demographics, etc. And there'll be a section at the end for requesting, let it be any of your local demographic reports and rental rates, and in appreciation of everyone's time, a complimentary lease review and rental rate analysis. On that note, Adrienne, people resources, and boy, if you've seen some of the Q&A, we've got some great colorful non-necessarily HR compliant but very relevant components. And the quick webinar for you is on a scale of 1 to 10. how important is staff retention to you in your practice, and the number one frustration with your team. As some poll results. Again, these won't be shared, but good to get a quick little synopsis of the room and where we see. So, Adrienne,
Yeah.
over to you. Thank
Well,
you, Jason.
thanks.
Great work.
Thanks, Jason. Thanks, Eric. Well, we're going to talk about some of the questions that are probably top of your mind if you're in a practice right now. We're going to kind of focus on the people aspect, your human resources as it is. Let me see if I can get this to switch over.
And as the polls are coming through, as you can imagine, 20, 23, 25, 100% is retention by far is the highest. Oh, a couple of 8s, couple of 9s. But definitely we have over 83% says that 100% says that 8 and above is the top component.
Yeah, not surprising at all. Well, I don't think it's a surprise to anybody right now that today's HR landscape is the most challenging thing that they're dealing with, and absolutely the most critical thing to the success of the practice. And so people may say, well, why are we in this position? Well, the bottom line is your people, your team right now really is your competitive advantage out there. It's not your system. It's not whether you're on Dentrex or EagleSoft or Open Dental or whatever. It's your people. It's not the processes, because those processes and all the equipment is only as good as the people that are operating them. So we find ourselves in kind of this diametrically opposed thing, that our people are both a risk management asset, but they're also part of the reward game, because they are a fundamental element to the success of your practice. So I laughed. My husband used this term the other day when he was talking about an incident that had happened in an HR office or a client's office. And he said, yeah, we're not in the good old days at this point where you used to put out an ad for a dental assistant and you'd have 25 resumes to kind of go through. That's not the case anymore, as you guys have indicated, with ghosting and your interviewees, your candidates not showing up, not calling to cancel. In the olden days, whatever period of time that was, some of the employers were doing the opposite. They would have candidates come in and interview them and then decide on one, but never bother to let the other candidates know that the position had been filled. And the scale has turned and the tide has tipped there, so that now the candidates are in the driver's seat for a good part of the whole system of getting a new employee, new team member on. So the ship has sailed as far as employers just being in control with who they're bringing on into their team. We have a lot of clients that will say, well, I'm looking for a specific personality and somebody that can do this, this, and this. And sometimes they end up going, oh, you've got a pulse, you're hired, which is never a good thing. But that's just something that some people are having to deal with. We get that. But we are using a whole new playbook now with the way the landscape is. So we're going to touch just a bit on people leadership and your organizational culture. Like I said before, your practice success is always going to be related to your people success, not just your patients, but your team members that are there representing you as well. It's the foundation for your entire practice. We encourage our clients to make sure that they've got employee engagement, and we kind of coach them in how to do that, how to show appreciation and recognition, and really how to support your team members if it's something, a skill that they want to learn. They want to advance. How do you support them and retain those quality team members? Because they really are your human resource. You know, we've gotten so used to just batting the term around HR and yeah, that's human resource and all that. It's your people. It is your human resource. So when we talk about that, the question I want you to answer to yourself right now is truly, you know, when you stop and reflect on this, how are you viewing your people, your team? Do you look at them as only an expense on your P&L, just a line on your budget that is a necessary evil? Or are you looking at them as a resource for you and the practice? And we would like for you to be able to look at them as a resource. And it's really all about perspective. Believe me, I know how easy it is to get into a frame of mind where you're frustrated, you don't know what to do. Sometimes you just want to throw your hands up or let everybody go. And you just think, I'm just going to start over. But what we're asking is if you can take a step back, take a deep breath, and look at things with a different perspective. Many of you will look at this picture and you'll see the gentleman facing the right. Many of you will also look at this picture and see the gentleman looking straight on. Some of you will be able to see both sides. And that's a lot of times in this new environment, in the post-pandemic era that we are in, sometimes you have to take another perspective when it comes to dealing with your team. What we're finding across the country, and I'm sure across the provinces in Canada, is that we as employers, as leaders, have to spend more time focusing on our people, not just the results, but our people. Our goal is really for you to have employees that really do feel like that they belong and they're included, that they have a sense of purpose in the job that they're doing for you. They feel like their contribution matters and they feel valued and appreciated. You know, when you do surveys, we do surveys across the country, and there is a lack of appreciation in almost every industry, but the dental industry is very high in feeling a lack of appreciation. And I'm not just talking about your team members, I'm talking about you as the owner, as the dentist, and as the primary provider. You are experiencing the same lack of appreciation from your team as they are maybe from you. So it goes both ways. I totally get that. I love this quote by Ken Blanchard. Leadership is not about you, it's about investing in the growth of others. If you have time, sometime in all of your leisure time, I would suggest that you go onto YouTube and watch the Simon Sinek video, why it's important for leaders to make their team feel safe. That's not the exact topic, but that will get you close. It's about leaders making your team feel safe and how that really coheses your team together when that atmosphere is provided. So let's get now putting the human back into human resources. So this is something I
Why
saw.
good leaders make you feel safe. Simon.
Yes, that's it. That is an awesome video. It's about 12 minutes long, I think. If you have nothing else to do, if you can square away 12 minutes, it is well worth listening to that. I came across this little sign the other day, and it made me laugh out loud because I think, especially after going through the pandemic with the struggles that some of us faced, everyone feels like that they are doing their best, and we look at it and go, that is terrifying. That's the best you got. That is terrifying. But when we're going to get into manage some of the performance issues and talking about managing performance and doing those sit down conversations. So one of the questions is, why do we wait to address the performance issues? Well, I think there's a number of reasons, and I think you'll identify with some of these. Dreading the conversation. You don't want to get into any big confrontational situation. So, but what if the employee is confrontational? How do you deal with that? Making sure that you've kind of got a plan B when you go into these situations, these conversations. And then what if this employee is really great at doing their job, but maybe there's an attitude problem or a respect problem? You have to deal with that. And you're thinking, well, she's really or he's really a great hygienist. I don't want to lose them. And what happens if I talk to them about that and they leave? Or what if you don't want to be seen as the bad guy? Nobody likes to be, labeled the bad guy or the hatchet person to have to terminate somebody. So let's move towards preventing having to get into those situations where those corrective actions are needed. So one thing we'd like for you to do is to ask yourself several questions. One of them is, okay, have I, as the leader, as the owner, as the dentist, have I done everything that I can to support this person's success in their job? What about my hiring practices? Am I really thorough when I'm going through the process of hiring? How is my onboarding session? You'd be surprised at the number of dental offices across the country if they go to hire either a front desk admin person or maybe a dental assistant, and this person says on their resume that they've had prior experience, and they just get thrown into the role without any onboarding, without any training the way your office does it. So onboarding and training is a critical element to make sure you're doing all that you can do to help that candidate succeed. You're never going to get away from needing a policy manual. If you've got one employee or more, you need a policy manual so that everybody knows the rules, the expectations, and how things will be dealt with. That policy manual gives you clear communications in conjunctions with the job description. How does that person know what's expected of them if they don't have a job description, which is their recipe for success? Having consistent management practices so that everybody knows, like I said, how situations are going to be handled. What are the rules of the game? What are the regulations that everybody has to live by? You want to make sure that all of that is defined clearly and that lines of communication are clear. There's no question about how things will be handled. And then engage with your employees. And I know you're probably sitting there thinking, you're telling me to engage my employees. They're making me crazy. How do I do that? There are ways that we'll talk about later that you can engage your employees that are very easy, won't cause you a lot of stress. But when you do all of these things that I just kind of breezed through, what happens if you've done everything you can and all of your prevention has not worked and it is failing? Well, there are three different types of corrective action. So the first one is verbal counseling. So you're going to objectively outline the problem, the deficiency. You're going to remind the person of what your policies are concerning that matter, because you have a policy manual that covers that. Let them know what the expectation is and where they need to improve. Those are very easy things for you to outline to them. Once you determine what that employee needs in order to improve, then brainstorm solutions. I always like to say with my team when I was managing, when you bring me a problem or a challenge, bring me a couple of solutions that you've come up with. I'll have a couple, and then let's brainstorm and see what we can do to work it out. If this is just a light corrective action, sometimes there's no need for you to have a big long document about it and have the employee sign, but make notes to yourself that you've talked to that employee about whatever the situation is, just so if you need to go back to it, you remember what you said and kind of outline the things that you talked about. So the next corrective action level would be the medium corrective action. This is where you're going to have that verbal sit down conversation, and you're also going to have some written documentation to do it. We're big on documentation. Our clients have about 65 different forms that they can use for just about any situation that you can think of in the world of HR and employment. So we advise our clients that as soon as they realize that there's going to be a sit down conversation, that they write out their notes, they get their memo done, and then as soon as they have that conversation, they have all the notes complete so that they recall everything that they talked about during that conversation. When you're speaking to the employee, to your team member, just be short and to the point. Um, a lot of people will like to start out with small talk. Well, how's the family? Well, how was your trip? This is a corrective action that you are giving. You need to make it short and to the point. List your key takeaways. Maybe the employee has made a commitment to improve in an area. Make sure that at the end of this conversation, the employee knows what you're asking, who is going to do what by when. Those are major categories that you really need to have finalized and talked about during this action. And then at the end of it, any type of positive input that you can give on anything that they've done good. In dentistry, you're trained to find things that are wrong. So that's where the training is, because that's where your job is. Your production is finding things that need to be fixed. Well, there's a lot of positive things that happen during the day, during the workday, if we can just center in and think on those things. The last thing on this medium corrective action is let the employee know that they can add things to that memo. If they think maybe you didn't perceive something correctly, they are welcome to put their statement on it, add to it with a separate sheet of paper that you will just attach. So they have had an opportunity to give you feedback and to contribute to whatever that action has been and whatever you talked about. Like I said, we are big on documentation, and really the golden rule in all of employment law compliance is objective documentation. And if you're ever called into question about how you handled something, how you treated an employee or team member, your objective documentation is going to be your most effective defense, especially if you get into any type of legal situation or legal action. So the last corrective action is what we consider heavy duty, where you're going to have your documentation, you're going to have that conversation, and you're going to have them sign off on the warning that you've given them. You have it all filled out with all of your information highlighted there. We have one of the forms that our clients have used is called a counseling memo. And it is literally you fill in the blank of what the situation was, the needed area of improvement, what the consequences would be, and by when you need the improvement, and then what the consequences would be if you don't see that improvement. Those are things that you need to have written down, and you need to be ready to discuss them. Like I said, you need to set the expectations, warn of potential consequences, and get that signature by the employee. A lot of times, people may say, well, what if I've got this all written down and it's documented and the employee refuses to sign? Well, that's not really that big of an issue. You need to explain to the employee that by signing it, they're not necessarily agreeing with everything that you have said, or they're not necessarily agreeing with 100% of what you've written or what you've talked about. All it is doing is confirming that you had the meeting with them and that you discussed these items. If they refuse to sign, our recommendation is to bring someone in either if this person has a supervisor, or there's someone else in the practice, an office manager, someone else that you can bring in and say, Karen, I want you to know that Connie and I have discussed her attendance problem and her tardiness or whatever the situation is. And I have given her instructions on how to improve it and when I needed to see improvement and what the potential consequences might be if I don't. And I just need you to affirm that this meeting took place. The person signs off on it and you have your documentation squared away. So don't worry if the employee, the team member refuses to sign. Just let them know why their signature is important. And if they still refuse, then just bring someone else in to take care of that. The last piece of what we consider really heavy corrective action is suspension. If there's something that's happened in the practice that is serious enough that you feel like you just need to move that team member out for a period of time, if there's a cooling off period or something that's happened that you need the employee to be away, you can choose to suspend them without pay. We suggest that you don't do it over 3 to 5 days. That's plenty of time for you to have them cool off and for you to decide what the next action will be. And of course, this is hopefully you're going to follow your documentation, whatever your policy manual says, as far as, you know, if you do have to send someone home without pay. But that, for us, that's considered the last step, especially if somebody has an attendance problem to begin with. Sending them home, even if it's without pay, might not be a big deal for them. So you really have to weigh that. Like I said, 3 to 5 days is the maximum that we would recommend doing. If you have to send somebody home for more than 5 days, you probably need to look at another alternative. So if you've done all of these performance steps and you feel like you've covered all the bases with that, what happens if you have to terminate someone? Well, just know that if you're looking for the perfect time to have the termination conversation, there's not going to be one. A perfect time does not exist. Just know that once you've made that decision to terminate that employee, just do it as soon as possible. Because if you don't, you're just going to become more and more stressed out the longer you wait. And it just becomes more difficult all the way around. Part of what you will do during this conversation is you're going to let that employee know of any terms of the termination. You're going to have their last check, depending on where you're located. A lot of states have different times that you have to have the final check. So you'd have to check and make sure that you're in agreement with whatever your state requires. You're going to talk about if they need to return uniforms, if they have a key to the building or a fob, something like that. You need to talk about that and how that's going to be handled. We advise you to, before you have that meeting, to deactivate any passwords that they might have. Now, if this is someone in an admin position and you're going to deactivate the passwords and then call them in for a meeting, that might be a little tricky if they find out that their passwords have been deactivated. So if you have somebody else on the backside that can do that while you're having the meeting, that's probably something that you need to look into. After you do all of these different phases and the termination has been completed, you need to let your team know. It's not going to be a big surprise because usually when that happens, the team already knows what's going on. But just keep the details to yourself. Respect the dignity of that employee, and you're not going to get into the details. During the termination of the employee, don't go into how bad you feel about having to let them go, because believe me, they will feel worse than you do. Let that employee know that it's not up for discussion, that the decision has already been made. Like I said, keep it short. And in kind of a wrap up for this, the number one corrective action mistake that we see a lot of is having a progressive discipline policy in your policy manual. It can be formal or informal, the way it's written, but that is just a process of a discipline where you have individual steps that have to be completed before you have the option of terminating that employee. We're not big fans of progressive discipline policies. And that doesn't mean that you can't have one. We just advise our clients not to have it in your policy manual because it really does tie your hands for your at-will prerogative of terminating an employee. If you have, for example, this progressive discipline policy where the first time the employee messes something up, your policy states that you are just going to do a verbal warning. The second time it happens, you do a written warning. Third time, okay, you're going to suspend them without pay. And then the fourth time, you're going to terminate them. If you have this in your policy manual, that those are the steps before someone can be terminated, you have to do all four of those. So there may be instances where you feel like that the failure to perform the job duties or something is at such a point that you really do need to let that employee go. The progressive discipline policy ties your hands, and it says your policy states that you have to do all of these things before you can terminate them. So like I said, we advise our clients not to have that in your handbook. You can certainly go by this if you want and do it, but you just need to have the employer's discretion of letting someone go right away versus having to go through the 4 points. So this is a little bit in the world of managing performance. And I know we've kind of breezed through it pretty quickly, but we are here to help you and to help navigate through this landscape of HR that we're facing right now. We are happy to answer questions. If you do have questions, you can email me there at adrienne@benterickson.com or either info@benterickson.com. So we're happy to help you.
And we made it even easier, Adrienne. There's a little button that pops up there as a quick little poll, and
Awesome.
we'll get that to Adrienne to follow up that as well. I know a few of you had private messaged me here. Yes, we have demographics, rental rates, comparable rates, as well as we're happy to spend a few hours pro bono to do the full analysis of the lease. And lots of topics, not the lightest of all topics on a beautiful Tuesday night, but questions that keep coming up through, both anonymously and otherwise, are the personal problems, right? I've gone through interviews and you want to come back and say, but what's the real story, right? What am I missing? You sound great, you've got good experience, etc. But what else, type of thing. So this doctor referenced challenges that can impact the work performance of the individual. Is there a way to help enhance the interviewing process to better screen for those that might not be there for the long tenure or other concerns? Adrienne, your thoughts there on how do we be proactive to make sure that we're doing our very best to make sure they're a good long-term fit?
Yeah. Organizational culture is critical in hiring your team, obviously. So one of the things that we have an aid for our clients is behavioral questions. So you will ask an admin person that's sitting at the front, um, tell me about a time that you had a patient that walked in and had the wrong appointment date or was late for their appointment and you could not see them. How did you handle that? What was the results? And the last part of that question's who who can I talk to verify that? So you give them situations. If it's a dental hygienist, it's um, tell me about a time that maybe you had a patient with a really hard diagnosis and they were very upset. How did you handle that? What did you do? What was the results? And who can I talk to verify that? So you want to let them give you examples of behavioral things that they have encountered. Now, yes, I know that people can make up things, but that's your due diligence in trying to come up with questions that will make them think. And then the last line of that is who can I talk with to verify that? To let them know this is real and I'm going to do my due diligence as well. We have found that the behavioral questions are really key to finding that perfect fit and maybe exposing some things that otherwise wouldn't come up. If you talk to former employers, then there are questions that you can ask. If that former employer, has a release to give references, which is a huge obstacle sometimes. Um, if that former employer tells you that would love to tell you, but I don't have a release, or if they just say all I can do is confirm the dates, then you ask, would you rehire this person? And for me, that would always be a red flag. If they say no, I would not, okay, then there's something there. Another avenue to explore is a personality assessment. It's called the Drake, and think about it as DISC on steroids. It is specifically for dental professionals, and we have it on our website if you need to look into it, but it really gives you a benchmark of that person's core competencies, um, and to see if you think that's going to be a good fit for your practice. So along with the Drake, just asking those behavioral questions are the best methods that we have found across the country.
Fantastic. Jason, one question on the leasing side. How late can you start the negotiation process with the landlord?
Well, certainly it's not ideal to start late, but we frequently see people that they ask us to negotiate their lease when the lease is already expired. That's quite a common one, in fact. The point is, it really is never too late. I would say to begin negotiation. It's always better late than never. One of the key ones is, as far as starting too early, there can be a point where you do start too early. If you, for example, if we begin negotiation 4 years or 5 years prior to the expiry, there's not much incentive for the landlord to make any substantial changes unless there's some opportunity for them to potentially see more revenue. For example, if you're looking to do an expansion, or heck, even in times of renovation, that can be an opportunity to revisit the lease. But as far as starting too late, if we have a dentist that they're a month away from the expiry, you know more the more notice that the landlord has that you want to stay, it's always better. It provides you more leverage, but frankly, it's never too late, really.
Great. Any final questions across the board? It really, people, it's both themes apply to both, right? Dealing with the challenging employee, making the decision to take action. It's a proactive investment versus reactive cost. And look, if nobody's pat you on the back and said, good job, You've weathered through something they never taught you in dental school: global pandemics, high interest rates, laying off all your staff, rehiring all your staff, having to apply for federal loans, right? Just trying to survive and get through. Why am I paying my rent when I'm physically shut down and don't have access to the mall? If no one's patting you on the back to go through the past 3 years, use this as the opportunity to do so. It
For
is
sure.
and has been wild,
For
and you
sure.
certainly deserve some huge appreciation. No one understands what it's like to be a dental clinic owner until you're there. You want to practice great clinical care, and there's all this other stuff, right? And how many times, Adrienne, have you heard, I love dentistry, I just don't like all the other stuff, right? I'll read the
Exactly.
first half page of the lease, but I don't want to look at the other 86 and a half other pages of stuff. So look, you've got fantastic resources that are hyper specialized on dental, that this is all we do, right? Things that you do once or twice a lifetime, just get Adrienne to help, right? Things that you do 3 or 4 times a year, sure. If you want to do that yourself, go for it. But just be conscious of your time, be conscious of your results, and be conscious of your stress. It is unbelievable to handle all these, and it's so much easier to say, Adrienne, here's my situation, right? And this is gonna sound unique, right? It all sounds unique, but here's my situation. What do I do? Right? And
Yeah.
to
Well,
have
at times it's good to reach out because you'll find that your situation is not unique, that we've heard it before, we've seen it before. You're not alone in that situation. And I would be happy to offer anyone on the call tonight that maybe is not a Ben Erickson client and you are interested in, you've got something going on, be happy to offer a 15-minute complimentary call with us. Just contact me directly and we can get that set up. If we can provide a little bit of stress release for you, we're happy to do it.
fantastic. Excellent. Same thing from Jason's perspective. We can set up a call, go through all the rental rates, vacancies, demographics, and line by line on the lease. If you haven't had it looked at, if you don't want to spend 6 hours going through and with a highlighter on a Sunday afternoon, please don't. We're happy to have a look through and review that lease for you. Jason, thank you so much. Greatly appreciated. Excellent work. Adrienne, always a true honor and a pleasure. And doctors, appreciate you. You're not alone in all of this. Keep up the great work, and let's enjoy it.
Thank you, Eric. It's a pleasure
Thank
being
you.
with you guys.
Thanks, Adrienne. Have a great day. Thanks, Jason. Thanks,
Take
everybody.
care.
Bye, Jason.
Take care. Good night.